As they said, I'm Jerome, and generally speaking, I do sessions on popular education. I try to use everything to me as an educational setting. You know, that we need to learn from each other. And in popular education, one of the fundamental tenets of it is that everybody in the room comes to the room with knowledge. Everybody around this table got knowledge. Even though you might not think you do. You know, when people throw out words like capitalism, people sometimes think they don't know anything about it because it's such a big word. But I guarantee you, you know a lot about capitalism. Many times we don't talk about it, and therefore you don't get a chance to bring all that knowledge up. But we try to set the table so that everybody feels comfortable in bringing up the knowledge that they have. I was asked to do a presentation today on capitalism, race, class, and gender, from resistance to revolution. And what I would like to do is, I want to talk about 4 points. A little bit about capitalism and what it is and how it functions, just a little bit. I think it's very, very important that we talk about vision, because we spend most of our time talking about what's wrong with this society, you know, and how it's hurting us and what it's doing to our family and children. And I think we need to begin to spend some time talking about, well, okay, we know what's hurting us. What is this world that we want to fight for? What would the elements of a world that you're willing to fight for look like? And I want to talk a little bit about that, or we want to talk a little bit about that. And then the third point is just the current moment. You know, what is the nature of this crisis that we're involved in? And then the fourth point is, you know, once we talk about vision, I want us to talk about, is this vision possible? What makes it, if it is possible, what makes it possible, and what are we going to do to implement our vision of this world that we're willing to fight for? So that's the 4 points that I want to talk about today. And I don't want to talk too long because I really want us to have a conversation. But on this first point of capitalism, you know, capitalism is a system of political economy. You know, it has a political side and an economic side. It's a system that was created by man. You know, it's not like nature or the wind or the sun that, you know, you basically got to deal with. You can't stop none of that. Capitalism was created by man. That means that we can do something with it, you know, because it's not a freak of nature or something. And the political side of capitalism is what we have historically called democracy. Now, I don't think we've ever really experienced democracy in this country. But they claim, and we sort of acknowledge, that we live in a so-called democratic society. I have a lot of challenges to that, but we'll talk about it. And then the economic side is really, you know, a class-based society that is based in the exploitation of people by other people. You know, how do I get you to work for me and make money and profit for me while I pay you as little as possible? That's the fundamental basis of this capitalist society. So that's the two sides of it. But before we get into some detail about it in the current moment, I really want to talk about this question of vision. And I want to go around the table, and I want people to talk about what would be some of the elements of a world that you're willing to fight for, that you're willing to spend your precious time and your precious resources to help develop. What would that world look like? Now, before I go around, I want to say something that usually when I ask this question, most people end up being stuck on what we have and the limits that what we have present to us. You know, there are certain laws that govern capitalism that limits certain things from happening because it be outside the laws of capitalism. Well, I'm hoping that we can unshackle those limits and talk about what we want. What is it that we really want? What do you think this society really has to have in order to continue as a thriving society? And think about the fact that capitalism don't have to limit you in what your vision is. So,
And you're talking society inclusive of white folk?
I'm talking society as a whole.
Or us as a people, as a nation of people?
I'm talking society as a whole. I don't think that given where we are in the development of this society in the United States, I think it's almost impossible to separate us from them. You know, almost. It might be possible, but that's kind of hard to see. But so I'm talking about society as a whole. What would we like that society to look like?
Free education. I think we're losing a lot of, especially black minds, to be disciplined, trying to channel into prison instead of educating them. This country is going to fall. They are falling behind and going to continue to fall behind. Technology-wise, for example, because they're using a lot of brain power. They'd rather incarcerate them than educate them.
Mm-hmm. Free education.
Living wage, or having the means to be able to sustain oneself and his family with some sense of dignity.
Being able to be sustained as a family, both economically and politically, I would assume.
There's a lot.
Yeah, I know. We got time.
There are two of them, I'd say. One of them is, I would like to see people not indoctrinated through what's called advertisement that prevents them from making the choices that are most beneficial for them, but instead they make the choices that benefit large corporations. I would like to see every lawn have a garden, or at least growing food, and not just something that's manicured. In every street, there could be there could be fruit trees and other things, other edibles that people could just take without having to necessarily pay for it. Those are two things that I would like to see, that I think would be obtainable.
Now, the last point is very interesting because you talked about getting stuff without paying for it. I think we'll talk a lot more about that.
Well, I like to see harmony, more harmony and peace all over with African Americans and the whole United States people. But I especially would like to see the African Americans start, black African Americans to really join together and start going within themselves and start knowing that we gonna have to fight for our own rights in this society, and knowing that dependence on America as it is for us African Americans, we have to struggle for that. We can't depend upon it that much. We got to pull in for ourselves to make this a better society for ourselves. And the only way we're going to do that, I think, is we got to go deeper within ourselves to make ourselves better people. And so that we can, as being better people, they'll try to come to you. But I think we should get stronger first, doing everything we can to get stronger, not trying to be so separate from them. Not separatists, and we separatists out loud like that, but you know you got to be separate so you can get stronger. Because as long as you blend in, you're running through your holidays, you're running doing everything that they got out there for you to plan in, you finish. So you got to come back in as yourself and to the people, and then start growing.
So you're talking about a society that, in this case, particularly black folk, can be independent and self-determined. Really, just being able to strengthen your community and all that incurs. Okay.
Well, I'm kind of shy, but one of the things
Me too.
is that that they give the race, just in general, a second chance instead of, when they're in jail for a long time, to educate them more and give them a second chance. Because sometimes they have things on the records and they won't be able to be involved in that. And just prejudice, I wish that would stop a little bit more. And as far as religion, I can't tell anybody what religion to belong to, but my Savior is Jesus Christ, and I think the world might be a little bit better. That's my opinion. That's all. Spiritual.
More spirituality and a society that forgives.
Oh, yeah.
And
that's
Well, that's what you said, really, when you said second chances.
Yeah,
That means
yeah,
that
yeah. Right.
we have to have a society that forgives in order to let people develop into a contributing person in that
Right.
society, no matter what they had done before. Okay.
If people make mistakes in life, and I think we should do something.
We all make them.
Yeah.
Vision for me, I guess I would touch kind of what you were saying. I would like to see a society that's not for profit and everything is monetized. And so that's kind of my vision, is to move away from a for-profit monetary system, which that is too. Everything we touch is going to monetize with profit, and so I think that trickles down to every single thing we touch. The second thing I would like to see is that I know that we're all a species, human being, but within that species there are subcategories, and there's culture. There's a black culture, there's a white culture, and I would like to see people take pride and ownership in knowing that, and it's not a crime to want to teach and love on your own people that look just like you. Now it seems like it's a crime to even want to do that, and so just a society where we all understand we're all humans and we all desire the same thing, but there is differences among us, and what's wrong with celebrating that or talking about it without it being evil or too black, so they say. Yeah.
And, yeah, okay. Well, that first one is profound, which I think is very important, a society without profit.
Well, they've kind of touched on about everything that I look at. It's kind of funny. I just talked about what you talked about the other day about growing fruit trees out here, which you just picked from it. But I look at how do we create a world that we look at everybody as human, and that is right. Marley says that the color of man's skin is no more significant than the color of his eyes. Because, we live in a society right now that's based on pigmentation politics, that we tend to relate only to those people who look like us, and that we can't see the humanness in other people sometimes. And we see that with the violence that's perpetrated not just here in our neighborhoods or in our country, but also around the world. That, that when other people are killed, that, we don't really look at that as a human being that's being killed there. And that, that if a black person is being killed in the streets today, that we make a judgment without even knowing the circumstances in which they was killed. And so that until we can get to the point of recognizing everybody as a human being, I think we got some real issues, right? Even dealing with a for-profit monetary system. Because even under the present system, people can't see how those people are being exploited. Until you can see the humanness, you talk about second chance, until we can see those human beings that we're talking about, then we'll deal with that as an issue.
Okay, that would be a pretty incredible society if we could organize it along those lines. How many of you think it's possible to do?
I think it's possible.
Everybody. That's unusual. Most of the time when I do this little exercise, at least half the people think we can't do that. But that's good. I think we can too. All right. So that's our vision of the world, and we believe that it's possible to achieve that vision of the world. So let's talk a little bit now about what this world looks like right now. What is the current moment that we're dealing with? And, I want to talk about those two elements, those two major elements of capitalism, the political side and the economic side. And I want to start with the economic side. I was talking to her earlier, and she was telling me that she's a technologist. And I told her that I'm going to be talking a little bit about technology in this presentation. And because I think technology is a very, very important element of what's going on in our economy, and consequently what's going on in our society. As was mentioned, I grew up in Detroit, and I worked in the auto factories in Detroit. The plant I worked in, Detroit Forge, is still operating in Detroit. When I worked there, we had 20,000 people that worked in that plant. 20,000. And we made gears and axles, all the internal engine parts of the car is what we produced. Today, and we, back then, I think, we were producing a lot of axles and caps and rods. But today, they are producing in that same facility 10 times as much caps and rods and engine parts that we did. And you know how many people work there now? 300. From 20,000 to 300 over a period of 25 years. But they make more stuff than we did. So the plant is very productive. You can copy that over and over again in just about every manufacturing facility in the world. As a matter of fact, the manufacturing facilities that they're producing, I was just reading an article about General Motors just opened a plant up in China. Just last week they had this grand opening of this plant. And the way they described the plant was, it is clean enough for you to eat off the floor. And you can walk through the plant for hours and hours and never see a person. Never see a person. They say in this plant that it's an assembly plant, so they assemble the cars. They say that the only thing that humans do in that plant is make sure that the robots don't break down. They're maintenance people, that's all they are. Now, I present that example to get us to think about what that means about what's going on in our economy when you got plants that can produce thousands of cars with just people doing maintenance on the robots that's putting them together. And if you can multiply that over and over again throughout the manufacturing industry in this country and throughout the world, what does that mean for jobs? And you can duplicate it in communications. You call up a company, and when do you talk to a human being? Hardly ever anymore. And it's going to get even more extensive with this whole development of artificial intelligence and its application to I'll just give you two examples of the future. Driverless cars and thus driverless trucks, which going to have a tremendous effect on employment in this country. And the 3D printer. Did y'all know that the space station, the Joint International Space Station, now they just delivered, I think 6 months ago, a 3D printer to the space station. And the 3D printer in the space station is now making the replacement parts for what breaks down on the International Space Station. this 3D printer. They're making houses from 3D printers now. You know, they just make the pieces of a house and take it to the site and put it together. I say that because for most of our lives, we've lived in a capitalist society that utilized technology to be labor enhancing, to help us do our job, to help us do our work. Now we're getting to the point of our development where they're labor replacing technology, which will eventually eliminate over 70% of all the jobs we know about today. And all of that is very interesting for the economy because capitalism fundamentally is based on one principal thing. And that is that there's a class of people who own stuff and they hire other people to work for them. So you got the owning class and the working class. And these two elements of capitalism get together, and that's the elements that keep the society going. Because, you know, you gotta have stuff produced, you got workers to do that, but you also have to have stuff bought. You know, the economy of this society is 78% consumer driven. Means that if stuff is not bought, we're not able to have a market in this country that actually buys the goods and services that we produce, then the people who hired us to make those things, if they can't sell them, they can't make their profit. And the cycle stops. Well, if you think about what's happening in that big picture, where all this technology is replacing all these jobs, who's going to buy the stuff that the technology is able to produce? And if we don't have a market of people to buy the stuff, capitalism will eventually cease to function. And that's the road, just economically, that capitalism is on today. And it can't do nothing about it. You know, I mean, it can't stop the introduction of high technology. You know, and as a matter of fact, every time a branch of industry introduces higher technology, everybody has to do it. Because that's another law of capitalism. You have to be competitive. You know, and if you ain't competitive, you get driven out of the marketplace. So that's the economic side of capitalism. And consequently, although we don't necessarily connect it all up all the time, consequently, all the crises we're witnessing within the economy, you know, the high level, there hasn't been any kind of serious raise for working people in this country since the 1970s. You know, we have been losing to the cost, you know, because you don't get cost of living, inflation just keeps on going, so we haven't had a raise. We, you know, basically getting paid the same thing that we got paid in the 70s, but the prices are 2017. You know, so this whole development of the introduction of high technology into the productive process has set capitalism on a continuous crisis. And it don't stop with the economy. That crisis has reverberated throughout. I mean, you look at the prison industrial complex, that's a result. I mean, they're using the prisons as an employment project. You know, they're saying, you ain't getting hired out here. You know, and so the moment you do something wrong, we sending your butt to prison, where you gonna work there, but you ain't getting paid. You know, and at the same time, when you got 2 million people in prison, just think if all those 2 million people were also looking for work, what that would mean for the so-called unemployment statistics that we deal with all the time. So it's a crisis in prisons, there's a crisis in our schools. You know, somebody talked about free education being one of the elements of the society we want to build. Right now, there's this attack on public education and education, period. And the reason is that they know, you know, My mama used to tell me a long time ago, you know, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. And that's what they're thinking, that a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. If you get that knowledge and then can't find a job, what are you going to do with your understanding of things? You're going to begin to try to figure out other ways of dealing with your situation. So rather than even give you a minimum amount of knowledge and education, they'd rather make sure that we're kept ignorant and backward so that we don't organize and struggle for our liberation and our right as human beings on this. So this crisis is infiltrating every aspect of capitalist society. And that's the situation that we're dealing with on the economic side. Well, politics, you know, I was taught that politics is a faithful reflection of the economy. Now, we don't generally think about it like that. But if you look at what's happening in the political arena, you're talking about, you know, there's this motion within the whole political arena, and it didn't start with the election of Donald Trump. It started long before that, in which they know that they need to exercise more and more control over what our response is going to be to this crisis, this economic crisis. So not only have they used the prison industrial complex, they used the police force. They try to intimidate us by killing us in the street. They try to intimidate us again by those same officers that killed us that they charged finally, but now they're getting off. You know, I think that cop here in South Carolina, what was it, a mistrial? How can you have a mistrial? Man, running away back to him and you get shot down like a dog and it's a mistrial. That's all part of the state saying to us that no, your lives don't matter. You know, all this cop has to say is that he was afraid for his life, although I was running away. Now, that's some hell of a stuff there. But it's all part of this struggle that people who run this country is trying to develop a system that can control what's inevitably going to happen in this country because of this economic crisis. Now, with the election of Donald Trump, it's pretty clear to most people, just about everybody I've talked to around the country, it's pretty clear that if we continue down this road, we're moving toward a consolidation of what most people call a fascist society. Now, when people say fascism, what do we mean? Well, in my case, when I say fascism, I mean a society where the corporations, the people who run the economy, you know, both in the country and throughout the world, is so infiltrated with the state apparatus, with the government, that in fact, the corporations are running the government. The government responds to the corporations. They don't respond to the people of that country. And where it's not complete yet, I think it's pretty clear to most people that that's the direction that this country is going in. And the Trump administration is doing all it can to make it normal, to make it seem like this is the way it's supposed to be. That's part of the whole process of consolidating fascism. It's trying to make it so that it's normal, so that you don't think anything of someone, you know, who will tell you on the one hand, I'm not going to mess with Social Security or Medicaid or Medicare, and then on the other hand, cut literally billions of dollars from it. You know, and that's just normal. You just lie, you know, and you do what you want. You know, or that the police is totally okay because they're trying to reinstate, you know, this whole stop and frisk ordinance throughout the country now, according to the Attorney General. You know, what does that tell you? A system that has been proven to be ineffective and actually very dangerous and oppressive, they want to make it to be the norm throughout the country now. So on the political side, and I say this didn't start with Trump, and it ain't just Trump we have to worry about. You know, everybody's pointing at Trump like, if we get rid of him, everything will be all right. But when I look at what's been happening in this country since the 70s, you know, the direction is clear. it's all a question of speed. You know, like if we would have elected Hillary Clinton, we'd still be going in the same direction, but it would be going a lot slower. You know, you still have the attack on public education. You still have the prison industrial complex act going crazy. You still have all the vital signs of this crisis being the same, but the Democrats would try to make it a little bit more palatable to us, you know, and make it go slower. You know, where Trump don't give a damn. You know, we just saying, let's do it. How's it going on?
Oh, good.
Good. You know, and so this whole question of consolidating fascism isn't a question of whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans. It's a question of who runs this country. The corporations that run this country feel like they need fascism to control the response that we're going to have to this crisis that we're living through right now. Because this crisis of capitalism is going to get deeper and deeper and deeper and heavier and heavier and heavier. And, you know, all it takes is this continuation down that road it is going on. And that is that more and more technology producing more and more things with less and less people. You know, and therefore, the unemployment going crazy in this country. So so that's the economic side of the crisis and the political side of the crisis. Now, I want to go back to this whole question of our vision and whether or not it's possible. Everybody around this table thought it was possible. I think it's possible. And I'm going to tell you what I think makes it possible. First of all, this whole question of the role that technology plays in the whole society. You know, technology is a double-edged sword. Technology in the hands of the people who run this country today means more and more unemployment, more and more poverty, more and more larger gap between the rich and poverty folk, you know, and more and expanding prison industrial complex and more wars, you know, in society that is basically in a continuous war footing. That's basically where we at. But the other side of technology is that, you know, technology can also and is also providing enough goods and services so that there need not be any poverty any place in this world. Now, historically, we've always thought, and to a certain extent it has been true, that scarcity has been the dominant sort of element that says, okay, the reason I got what I got and you don't have what you got, because it ain't enough to go around. And I'm strong and you weak, I get it. You don't. You know, scarcity was the thing that people always fell back on to justify why there are poor people throughout this world, because it's just not enough. Well, that's not true. That is a blatant, it's been a lie for a long time, but now it's clearly a lie. Because of the productivity of the level of technology that we're using in this country and throughout the world, there is absolutely no reason for poverty to continue to exist. The only reason it exists is because the people who are in power know that if they unleash this technology to meet the needs of people, they're undercutting the very system that makes them rich. They would be undercutting the capitalist system, and they can't do that. You know, and so they gotta control how, you know, this used to blow me away when I first started to learn about it. But they got all these things, particularly, you know, vegetables and milk and all that. They got this stuff stored because there's too much of it. People are starving and they got milk and vegetables stored in these limestone caves to preserve them. You know, all over the damn country. Why? Because they know that if they put all those things onto the marketplace, it will reduce the price to such a degree that they won't be able to make a profit. And if they can't make a profit, they go out of business. You know, and so this technology, being the two-edged sword that it is, means that the only thing that stands between us and our ability to do some of the things that we talked about in our visioning part, like distribute stuff without worrying about profit. The only thing that stands between us and accomplishing that is who holds power, who makes the decisions about how things are going to be distributed. We believe that with the level of technology that's being produced and the kind of disruption that it's causing under capitalism, that we have got to begin to think more about a cooperative society, a society that's not based on competition, but based on cooperation. Capitalism is based on competition. Workers competing with each other for jobs, capitalists competing with each other for markets. It's just competition. With this level of technology able to produce all these goods and services, we have got to begin to think about distribution of goods and service based on need and not based on ability to pay, which I think it was you that said that's a big part of your vision of the future.
Yeah.
Distribution of goods and services without money. And I think that the possibilities of that is being set right now. And it's all a matter of power. So let's get to this question of how do we deal with this question of who decides. Now we know that these whole questions of race, class, and gender are almost, they're objective things in capitalist society, meaning that yes, there's no such thing as race from the standpoint of human beings being different races. Scientists disproved that a long time ago. But that don't mean we don't suffer from white supremacy and racism. That's very clear too, that white supremacy is alive and well. Male supremacy is alive and well. And these things are used to prevent us. They're used as these dividing wedges to prevent us from getting together. They want us to look at our differences as opposed to what unites us. They want us to look at our skin color or the fact that I'm a man and you're a woman, or I'm in a higher class than you are because I own my own little business over here, and you just work for a living. While in reality, both these small business owners as well as workers actually have to work, 16, 17 hours a day if they want to make a living. So they end up being just plain old workers too, although they, or might hire a couple of other people. But my point here is that these things are used to divide us, and that's been the weapon that the ruling class of this country have used since the beginning of this country. Divide and conquer. If we can divide them, and they'll figure out anything, religion in some parts of the world and here, race, class, gender, they will figure out any possibility, and then they make it real. Like even today, women make 85 cents that a man makes. When a man makes $1, a woman makes 85 cents. Black folks, when we make 67 cents or something like that, white folks make $1. And so they make it real. They make it so it's no longer just this ideology of white supremacy or male supremacy. It becomes a force, because it limits you from your full potential. And so these questions of race, class, and gender are the fundamental questions that we have to deal with if we're going to build a movement in this country powerful enough to determine who's going to make the decisions about what we can do with the prosperity, with this technology, with this environment that we presently live in. It is up to us. In the final analysis, it's true that capitalism is in crisis and that crisis cannot be reverted, that it's going to continuously be in a downward spiral crisis. But it's also true that they're not giving up anything. You know, they're not going to say, you know, this system is in crisis, let's figure out another system that will make it better. No, they will say this system is in crisis, we got to kill some more people. You know, we got to have another war. You know, we got to make sure that white folks go out and attack these black communities because they're getting to be uppity. You know, they're going to do everything they can to maintain power. And so it's left up to human beings to tip those scales. That's our job. Our job is to try to make sure that we develop a strategy that can actually implement the vision that we all talked about. And the vision that this country needs if it's going to survive. You know, and that to me is the ultimate sort of thing of how do you go from resistance. I mean, we're now resisting. Just about everybody's resisting. But how do you go from resistance to revolution? And the only way you go from resistance to revolution is that you develop a strategy around which you can implement your vision. And where that vision becomes the vision of a critical mass of people in the United States that will make it a vision that has to be dealt with, that a movement develops around, that provides the kind of force that we will need if we're going to be effective in moving this country in a positive direction, in a revolutionary direction, and not just trying to resist and maintain the society as it is. And I will stop there and open it up for discussion.
Yes. When you mentioned capitalism, you talked about the two components, economic and political. But I contend there's also a psycho-ethical, spiritual component, which indoctrinates people to believe that their self-worth is dependent upon what they possess. And until you can counter that, if that is possible to counter that, and I believe it can, it's possible. That's going to be necessary in order to allow people to resist capitalist structures. Otherwise, what they see, the capitalist system wants us to have a certain understanding of reality. And it's only because we accept that reality that we are able to be exploited. For example, most people have smartphones. I don't own one. I purposely choose not to have a smartphone. I have a cell phone, but I only use it for emergency use or when I travel. But I have a landline, and I don't believe I have to have a smartphone. Some people believe that they must have a smartphone, and they must have the most recently released one.
Right.
But that's because they have been conditioned to see their whole sense of self-worth, their sense of importance is dependent upon owning these things. And until that changes, they are going to resist wanting to create the kind of society that we're talking about that's based on cooperation.
No, I agree with that.
Oh, not.
I don't disagree. You know, the cultural side, politics and economics is two fundamental things of capitalism. But all this other stuff is part of it. That's what we call the superstructure around the society. And they use that superstructure to bolster their control, to maintain their control. You know, and so not only is it, religion and the use of religion and all that, but it's also the use of history. You know, they lie about everything, most people, the reason I started this talk by saying capitalism was man-made and it hadn't been here forever, because you talk to a lot of people and they think capitalism is the only system that we've ever had. You know, that's because that's the way they present it to us. And one of the things that I try to constantly remind people is that in this society that we live in, we endure 24-hour a day, 7-day-a-week propaganda that says this is the greatest country the world has ever known. And if you think it ain't, there's something wrong with you, friend. There's something wrong with you. If you ain't made money in this society, there's something wrong with you. There ain't nothing wrong with the society, there's something wrong with you. And that propaganda machine is filling up every aspect of society. You know, everything that we could think of, our education system, the movies, everything. So yeah, it's a big picture.
How does the underground economy fit in? There are two kinds of underground economy. That's the underground economy that actually feeds off of harming people.
Mhm.
Then that's the other kind where people are doing things that are beneficial
Right.
that allows them to survive.
Right.
So how does underground economy fit into
Well,
the idea of
well,
making a change?
I want to get other people
Oh, okay.
in too, but I hope when you say that, you mean I don't really consider them underground, but they're like
That's
cooperative.
what it's, yeah, that's what it's.
Cooperative entities, like the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, for instance, who they work within capitalism, but they work so far on the edges that they can still function. You know, so I hope you're including that too
Oh,
in the
yeah.
underground. Yeah. Okay. Well, and I might have started this off like this, but I'm not answering all.
Oh,
We all gonna answer
oh,
these
yeah,
questions.
everybody.
Yeah, one of the things I want to bring into the discussion is co-ops and like I say, employee-owned type businesses. Because, you know, the reality of it is going to have to be a transformation from capitalism to some other alternative type
Exactly.
economies. Economies, you know, you have to have economies some form of shape. And like you say, capitalist system hasn't been here forever, you know, probably what, 300, 400 years old.
Yeah.
At the max. But me and Lefty, we went and spoke with people in the labor movement, about 2 months ago, late March, I think it was. And our concept, what we wanted them to understand is that if they understood the importance of employee-owned businesses in the South, because of the traditional way of building unions hadn't worked in the South. And I was trying to explain to them by having employee-owned businesses is a way to build unions, you know, because, you know, everybody, and then there's another way to build up people's income if they live in the area. Say, for instance, if we own the business and we in competition with some capitalist corporate business, one, we're going to pay ourselves more. Two, we're going to provide pensions for ourselves because we don't have to worry about profit. You know, we don't have stockholders, we have ourselves. And so we was trying to get them to buy into that concept about employee-owned businesses. In the same way, me and Representative, well, it was his idea, down in Lower Richmond in Columbia area, we're talking about farming. You know, it's like the district that he represented, or was a representative of, had the most densely owned, black-owned property in anyone in the country. You know, black people in Lower Richmond own their own property. And one day, you know, say 40s, 50s, 30s, that was important. I mean, because they could turn that property into wealth. Right. As it is now, the property it'd be a burden. Because, you know, all you're doing is paying taxes on it because you don't farm it anymore. Because, you know, all these corporate farms have tucked away their ability to make money off their farm. So what he was trying to do, one, to educate young people about how farming actually happened, and two, just get people to get some value out of their property before they sell it. Because, you know, what happens is self-development. Some builder or developer will come by, offer you a little bit of money for your property, and then wait a couple of years, you turn around, they got houses going up over there.
Right.
You know,
right.
And what that does, run the property, everybody else's property value up, so your tax is high and you're not getting anything, so they're going to end up selling theirs too. So, yeah, things that people got to move on, like say, everybody got to open up their minds to think about different ways. You know, because like we've been trained to think the only way to make money is to go open a business, and then after we open that business, franchise. You know, because that's how corporations work.
That's how you make money.
You figure out one way to make it, and then you duplicate it. You know, and you work with people for the less amount of money you possibly can, so you can have that money to duplicate. You know, so but if you open up an employee-owned type business, they can duplicate too. But they're going to take care of the responsibility of one, making sure the company is profitable enough to keep growing, and two, to make sure it exists.
Okay, before I go to you, would one of you ladies like to say something? Yes, you're next. Oh, I thought you, okay.
I'm glad you touched on capitalism because one of the biggest bankruptcies in the United States just happened. And we were one of those. And that was the municipal bonds for Puerto Rico. $70 billion, the biggest bankruptcy in the history. Not a word. That should tell you, that should tell people something that capitalism is on the way down. Major, huge.
Municipal bonds of what? I didn't hear you.
Municipal bonds. And so, I'm going to tie this in real quick. I used to work for Wall Street. So I tell people, man. So, that was a hedge fund. And hedge funds are, well, in fact, this is going to touch every last one of us in this room. That bankruptcy, everybody's going to feel it. Because municipal bonds are your city, your local streets, infrastructure. Everybody's going to get hit. You got investments, going to get hit too. So I just want to, I'm glad you, real quick, there's some pieces that I really do. And I also work at USCF State. So I'm heavily involved with students. One of the issues that university is having is that our students aren't finding jobs. So here is the yellow elephant in the room, big yellow elephant in the room, and you sit there and be like, this is all I hear from our community. Go to school, get your good grades, get your college degree. And I'm trying to tell people, you got to stop saying that. It's not like that anymore. And so we're having a lot of students not finding work, and one of the reasons why, we decided to have U2 open. There's a gray area in technology that people don't talk about. One, it runs all our investments, all algorithms. And that was the reason why I crashed bankruptcy. Two is that the more technology it is, the less people it is, the less pay you get. It governs your pay. And so there's a lot to probably take all day to discuss this, but I do like the fact that you are talking about that because our economy is run on algorithms. And that's letting you know that actually humans have nothing to do with this. And so your investments, your health care, one of the reasons why they're having an issue with the they're just trying to figure out how do we create a computer program that will make a profit? Can we create an algorithm that makes decision processes to make a profit for that select few? So I'm really glad you're talking about that because that is so major. Most people don't realize that. Like I said, you dealt with the political and economy of it in class. A friend of mine and one friend just came back from Cuba. And what was one of the surprising things to her from Cuba was that she noticed there was no class. No matter what your degree is in, how educated you are, everybody gets paid the same thing. And she thought maybe there would be an issue with that. She says nobody can complain. Now they have to take a second job or something like that. But the issues we have here is not over there. And so you see that there are other systems we may not like, so-called certain isms, but it does work. And so it's interesting to see that, like you said, capitalism is winding down because this is huge, a major debt economy more than it's a profit economy.
Right.
It's debt. So let me say that. That's my piece.
Everybody should go to Cuba, especially now that it's open. Everybody should go before
Before the changes.
they get too open. Because Cuba has free education from birth to advanced degrees. They have the best medical system in the whole hemisphere. Everybody, just about people from the United States go to Cuba for cancer treatment because their cancer treatment is so advanced, and we go on and on and on. But the one thing I learned about Cuba that just shook me up, Cuba is hit all the time by hurricanes. There hasn't been a death in Cuba from a hurricane in about 30 years. Why? Because Cuba is set up in communities, and in that community you have everything. You have doctors, and nurses, and teachers, and schools, and everything. When a hurricane is diagnosed to hit this area, they take that whole community and evacuate it. The whole community, the doctor goes, the teachers go, everybody goes. So if anything happens, you got the resources you need to deal with it. And they just move them out of the way, And consequently, they do a lot of damage, but they don't kill anybody. But that's what you can do in a cooperative society. That's given that the United States is constantly choking them. It's not like they can have regular interaction with other countries. They have to do most of it themselves. So everybody should visit Cuba.
Quick plug, we are planning a trip to Cuba for.
Good.
No, we are planning a trip.
Good.
Okay, all right. You brought up.
Well, he's next.
I was going to ask you, since you brought up something about technology, I just wanted to ask her something. Is that okay? Okay. How does open source fit into this vision we're looking at? For example, I don't use Microsoft. I use Linux. I have Linux Ubuntu, and now I have Live. But a lot of people, they feel totally dependent on Microsoft. So how does the open source, particularly in computer technology, how does an open source fit into this vision?
Of the vision that we're seeking?
Yeah.
It could be used. Microsoft is a corporation. In a sense, it's a bully. Let's just be honest.
Yeah.
It's a bully. And so the only reason why you see what you see is because it's been pushed on people to use it. Linux has been around. Linux is one of the best softwares out there. I use Linux. We use it at the university. One of the best and safest software operating systems you'll ever find. But they don't bully you. Microsoft is a bully. And that's what you're going to get. But it works just as fine. There's no issues.
And I'll just add to that because, this whole question of a cooperative society, that's really what our collective vision spells out as a cooperative society. Open source means that if you develop a different wrinkle to that operating system, you put it out there and everybody has access to it. Everybody that wants to use it can use it. But that's only the half of it. The other half is that everybody that uses it can also improve it. They can make an improvement and put it back out there. And so open source is totally compatible with a cooperative society. No one's asking somebody to pay them if they use their software. And no one is asking to be paid if they improve that software. So it's very compatible.
Right. Why not pick up what Jonathan said about Cuba? We plan a trip. I think we're going to try to plan it around January of next year. Because of hurricane season, we are looking at that. So if you're interested, get with us. So my question, I got two things. One, we talk about capitalism being on the way out, right? So when we talk about capitalism, doing away with capitalism, people have this fear, right? So what are you going to replace it with, right? So, you look at, there's a system, communism. Does communism answer, let's say communism / co-op? How do they serve as alternatives? And the second thing, right, is that, like a lot of times, right, in dealing with issues, right, you talked about critical mass earlier, reaching critical mass. a lot of times these struggles are led by black folks. And we pick up white allies. But one of the things we talked about earlier about, us being perceived as being too black. Now, it's kind of interesting that someone mentioned to us that if they engage in things that we do, they see it as an all-black thing. They see it as a form of protest. But here in Spartanburg, there's a white group called Upstate Resist that had a protest here against immigration, right? And it's kind of funny, right? That white folks can go out and hold a protest, right? And it's seen like, okay, that's great. But if black folks hold a rally of some type, right, it's seen as it's a demonstration of some type negative way, right? So why is it, right, that we have these two different perceptions, right? That if one group of people does something, it seems like it's okay, but if the other group is one that lead the event, that is seen in a different light. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it could be the same thing, right? So in terms of organizing, right, you've been doing this for a while, right? How do we deal with those challenges, right? So right, dealing with challenge and organizing, and particularly being black-led, another aspect of it is we start talking about doing away with capitalism, alternative economic system. Okay. And one last thing on that, because at the conference last year, at Chronic, we did do a piece on a system called Ubuntu, which dealt with a cashless system.
Okay, first of all, communism. The big C word or the big boogeyman, that we've always been told is the worst thing. They eat babies, don't they? The communists. First of all, there's never been a communist society yet in this world. They have made it to what is called socialism, but they haven't made it to communism. Socialism is like the next to people who have studied Marxism. We understand that socialism is the next transition from capitalism, and before you get to communism. And socialism basically is a cooperative society. It basically is organized around the principle from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. There's no discussion of money. It's like you give to the society what you can according to your ability, and then you get back from society what you need to live and advance. And that principle is then used to organize the economic society around it to be a socialist economic society. So it's a cooperative society, and we have all been taught to think of it as evil because people who study these things, people who run this country, know that this is a process, an objective process that's going on. And they want to stop it. They don't want it to happen. So therefore, they're going to make it like, you go toward socialism, you walking into a lion's den. You're going to get ate up or something, And so that's that whole thing. I mean, it's the boogeyman that they present to us to keep us from even thinking about it. Or if someone says to us, we're moving toward it, and we got to ensure that we establish a cooperative society that's based on socialist principles, you're supposed to reject that. Right. Yeah, you're supposed to reject that out of hand. That's ridiculous, right? So that's what I think about that. On this other question, I think that, these questions of race and class and gender are like the center of this other question, meaning that the way that they maintain their rule is not only by dividing us according to those, but also by making profit off of these concepts of race and gender. That's why if you're a black woman, you're triply oppressed. You're oppressed as a worker and exploited as a worker. You're oppressed and exploited as a woman, and you're oppressed and exploited as being black. And all of those things have an effect on the way you think about what's going on around you and the way you actually have to live, in terms of just how this society is organized in order to make sure that you're in competition with everybody. And that competition drives down your wages and the wages of the person you're in competition with. Everybody loses except the corporations. And so I think it's just critically important, that we do not allow them to spook us about a society that, quite frankly, when I first started studying, I knew nothing about socialism or communism. And I was like everybody else. Well, that's crazy. What kind of crazy talk is that? But I think that we have to, one of the things that I think we have to continuously fight for is that we have to be independent thinkers. We have to be able to think for ourselves. That means that we have to study. We can't take a position, particularly when that position comes from the people who are running this country and who are exploiting and oppressing us, tell us, whatever you do, don't go there. There must be something over there that might be beneficial if they're telling us, people that they treat the worst of all the people they deal with, not to go there. And so I think it goes down to this question of being an independent thinker myself and being able to think for ourselves and be able to analyze what's good for us or what's not good for us. Wait a minute. I want to give another one of these women.
I'll make a comment. So you're trying to think of ways to help topple capitalism. So I wonder if there was a critical mass, whatever that would be, that, let's say, stop buying stuff, We talk about maybe cell phones and the things that we like to buy that are really unnecessary, Enough people, would that help bring down capital? We just didn't shop so much.
Right.
We didn't shop on, let's say, Black Friday. We didn't run out trying to get cheap TVs and stuff, that helped
Right.
along.
One of the pieces of our history of struggle, not just black folks, but the history of struggle of this country, has been the use of what was called secondary boycotts. In the civil rights movement, that was one of the major tactics, was secondary boycotts. And what that meant, of course, was that, in a town like this one, Spartanburg, if you had a shopping center that was treating black people wrong, then you could boycott that shopping center. And that was used many, many times, just boycott it. A shopping center, a place of business, transportation. It was the boycott of the transportation system in Montgomery, Alabama. That was the basis of the Montgomery bus boycott and so on and so forth. So yes, boycotts, economic boycotts is a really serious tactic that we should use. Of course, they outlawed secondary boycotts. Oh yeah, because they know how useful they are. Like right now, say you're a trade union. Say you're a trade union that's part of the auto industry, and we're in contract negotiations with the auto company, and we say we're going to boycott Chrysler. Well, now that trade union would be fined literally thousands and thousands of dollars a day for every day they enforce that boycott, because they pass laws that makes secondary boycotts illegal, because the tactic is so good at mobilizing and hurting capitalism. So yeah, we got to get back to some real economic boycotts in this country.
You mentioned earlier too about the whole political process, economic and politics. And I think I have two concerns, with regards to us moving from resistance to revolution. And, those two entails the political process and how we've been duped to this two-party system, okay? And that people still support that two-party system, are still ignorant about the influence of ALEC and the corporatocracy. I think we're in fascism right now. We're not going there.
Right.
We are there. And so I get frustrated because our people not trying to know about that connection and default to religion. As in, I don't get involved in politics because, it's against, it's not the system of God. I'm just, I get, sick of that. And then our churches, what helped us to have the level, the degree of access, I wouldn't call it freedom, it's access that we have today, is because of the political influence or activity of our religious institutions back in the 60s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. But we've gotten away from that because our churches want to only deal with the souls of the people, but yet, our families are falling apart. So, when you think about going from resistance to revolution, I'm just looking for, some other strategies to help out. We're going to wake our folk up because, we too black when we want to do something in the church that's about black empowerment, and yet we're still, we're pedaling backwards. So I just get frustrated and need some help.
Right. Well, for me, it goes back to this whole question of vision. Our ability to not just, talk to people about how messed up things are, but to also say to them, like we just did earlier, what would you be fighting? What would make you want to fight? If we were, what kind of society do you want us to build that you're willing to fight for? Because in the final analysis, we have got to build a movement in this country that's big enough, because this is a huge country with all kinds of diverse people in diverse regions. So we're talking about a huge movement, but that movement have to be imbued with a vision, because it's only around the vision that people can actually, the civil rights movement, people bought into that freedom vision. It was a vision of our being able to be free. It wasn't just voting, which they sort of reduced it to.
Right.
But it was that vision of freedom that made people come out and fight and lay down their lives for. We have got to figure out how do we imbue this vision within this developing movement that will attract this huge number of people that have to be a part of this movement if we have any chance of being successful. And so for me, we have to do the kind of political education with each other that provides us with a basis for having this vision that we can believe in, that we can begin to organize a strategy around that will draw people in and that can be implemented given where we are, given this environment that we live in today. But I think the piece that's missing is the vision piece.
Yeah, a couple things. The first thing I wanted to mention was, we were talking about capitalism versus socialism. Was it last year, year before last, Bernie Sanders, they was calling him democratic socialist. They did polls. Capitalist was perceived by the millennials, the younger generation, of those, as a more negative thing than socialism.
Right.
So understanding that, it means we understand that things are changing. It's just a matter of, how fast it changes. One thing about vision that I want to bring up too is that, all this won't happen overnight. I used to, mentor of mine with Jessica Simpkins, and she used to talk about, she was like beginning of the civil rights movement, all the way from the 40s, I think in NAACP, all the way to her death in early 90s. She lived like 93 years or something like that. But her vision and the vision of people like like her that worked in that movement, Thurgood Marshall, you know, she worked with Thurgood Marshall, school board, with all that education stuff. Was about change and about getting rights and freedoms for everybody. And then, you know, and then the other thing we got to do, we got to make sure we don't get in this trap to think that everything got to be black. You know, because there's white people in the struggle too, that's in just the same situation as we are. And it won't happen if we personalize this stuff. We got to be just as open about making sure that our vision be inclusive as just as way they make the oppression inclusive, you know, because they oppress all of us. So, you know, when we come up with a vision, it's got to be with the impression that, you know, we're trying to change the world for everybody, not just for ourselves. Exactly. And but you know, I think the vision is developing. I was at a meeting last Saturday, the Democratic Party meeting, and I said the word alternative to capitalism as and, you know, it was like the chair, Trail Robinson. He looked at me like, who? I mean, it's like, you know, but they got to get comfortable, and then we got to get bold enough.
Who let him in?
You know, like I say, hang him, get him out of here. You know, but you know, that's the thing. We got to push because you know the conversation won't start until somebody starts. You know, so you got to get comfortable with yourself. But talking about alternatives to capitalism, talk about because you know, the reality of it, it's our responsibility. You know, and it ain't like we talking about something that's not going on already. You know, this country is in, you know, like what they say, the Netherlands, you know, in northern European countries, some of the Middle East countries already provide a livable amount of money for the citizens in their country. In Kuwait, places like that, people don't, you know, poverty is a different thing. I mean, you know, to America where, you know, we staunch capitalists that we gonna try to hold this group down for this group to get up, you know. And the last thing I mentioned is I was watching a program on one of those cable news networks. This guy, a former congressman from Illinois, was talking about we couldn't have universal health care because of the ghettos, the cities, the people in the ghettos. You know, what he wanted to say, we can't have universal health care because we got black people in our society. And they don't have black people over there in Germany, which is a lie too. Black people everywhere. Yeah, you know. So yeah, and they telling the story and trying to get people to believe that story. We got to make sure that we push back against those type of things as much as they put it in front of us.
Okay, before. She asked another question that I'm hoping other people will speak to, and that's the question about the two-party system. You know, and I know people in here work for Bernie and is working with the Greens, so I wanted to make sure we don't miss her question.
Ideally, I don't think y'all.
Wait a minute, oh. You're next.
Oh, okay. Well,
And then
I want to address that. I think Lawrence probably addressed the party system. Well, I want to talk, kind of touch on Lawrence's piece about black position and, you know, black struggle per se, right? And I think this table right here is a good representation of what Americans like. Let's say that I'm sitting here, I'm the only black person here, and then the rest of you are white. And so the thing about defining the black struggle for me, right, is about if we sit at the table, right, knowing or making sure our voice is heard and know what our interests are sitting at the table. It's not a vision that excludes everybody, but I think it's very important, right, that we will never, black folks, will never set the agenda for this country based on just sheer numbers. But we do have to make sure we have a voice, a very clear voice, what our expectations are inside of this country. And if we're not clear there, then it becomes very hard, right? And if we're on one page, right, you know, if we're going to exclude ourselves, right, just to get along, we would never be there. We won't have a voice. So I think that's where, you know, in terms of blackness, for me, coming together and talking about issues is very important. It's not about creating a vision that excludes everybody. It's about making sure that your vision is understood at the table in terms of the masses and not excluded.
You know, before you got here, we did a vision exercise.
Right.
You know, which everybody went around the room and just talked about what would be some of the principal things that would be included in the world that we're willing to fight for. You know, what is our vision of that world? Everything that came out was universal. You know, it's not like free education, you know, distribution of goods without money, end the white supremacy. You know, you might think that's a black thing, but that's not a black thing either. That's a universal thing. Because white supremacy makes sure that some white folks don't get in either. You know, so I'm just saying, so when you do a vision exercise, I've never done one, and I've done lots of them, where there was a vision that came out that was only applicable to one set of people. You know, the vision of what people want and what they're willing to fight for is universal. So,
Yeah, and you know, I didn't want to imply that I
I know.
wasn't saying that either.
I know, I'm just saying that that's just the experience.
Right.
Go ahead.
This gentleman brought up the issue of land ownership. And there are two things. In my ideal vision, there would be no private ownership of land. Land would be a communal resource because land, natural resources are in the land, the mineral resources, the oil and the gold and all that. And it should not be privately owned. Individuals may be paid to extract it, but the resources themselves should be communally owned, belong to the people. The other thing is within the capitalist structure, I used to live in Oklahoma. And in Oklahoma, people don't generally sell their land, they lease it. And so I think when you were talking about black folks in Wilkerson County, the idea when you inherit some land, so if there are several acres and you got like 25 people inheriting it, then they don't have to sell it. They can lease it as a family. They can lease it for 100 years and make sure it never leaves the family. And you can retain the mineral rights. Even if you sell it, you can retain the mineral rights. So that there's this process of understanding even within the capitalist structure that can benefit a larger number of people that the elites are taking advantage of. And we don't seem to understand it.
One question, I think we have to be out here by 4:30.
Right. Okay.
And one last question, and also we mentioned that at the end of this, there's a reception over at Ubuntu. I need y'all to come because we bought a lot of food. I need y'all to eat. We need you to eat and drink. Eat, drink, and be merry. So
Come
I
on.
expect everybody to be over there. If you don't know where it's at, we'll make sure you get there. It's walking distance.
Right
And
across the
also,
street.
please fill out the evaluation forms. So I hope that also this last piece we get Sydney's question answered.
Right. Did I see your hand? Oh. I'm still waiting on, you're one of two people in the room that haven't spoken yet.
Well, this is why I came to this event, really, because I want to know more about things that's going on. So I'm learning and I have learned a lot, so I hope to continue to come and then I will be more
That's cool.
vocal about things, so you're receptive, forgive me.
That's cool.
But I know I do want world peace and, you know,
See,
a better life.
you got some stuff to say.
We're glad you're here.
Thank you.
Did you?
No, I enjoy it, but I still think we need to concentrate more. African Americans need to concentrate more on ourselves. Not to be, like I said, segregated and everything else, but if we don't get ourselves together in our little circle, African Americans, man, we gonna be, man, that dude's gonna blow us away. If we just try to blend in too much, then we're gonna blend out. So we got to pull back and get some strength. And then, like we was talking about using the boycott and stuff like that, we can have a silent boycott. And they can go around a silent boycott, but they don't know nothing about it. Because we ain't gonna invite them to the table and know nothing about it. And let them just go ahead right on around. So you can have these type of things, but we got to work together. We got to work together because, look here, white supremacy is stuck up in these buildings and these places, right? And it ain't coming out. It ain't coming out. I mean, I know a lot of people don't get into spiritual things, stuff that much with that. White supremacy is the devil. And the devil ain't gonna leave. You're just gonna get more and more strong. Anytime you back up, you push him down, he going, but he try to find a way to get you at all times. Yeah. The white, look at it. So we got to work together. If we don't pull together, but it's at us now. So we got to pull together as a group and find every strength that we can to collect up and then use the money is what we got. We got a little money now. And we need to take, everybody got a little money, even I got a little money. So we take that little money we got and try to get pulled together and do something. But because we blend in too fast, we blend it out.
Okay, all right, well, what I'm gonna do is, can we, are you coming over to the place and finish it over there, because we do have to move these tables back. Oh, go ahead, I want you to go ahead.
No, did anybody want to make a comment about it?
Yeah, he does. Lawrence does.
Oh, yeah, about the party?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, well, the only thing I was gonna say is that that's still another tool of the establishment to keep us in our places, as they say. Parties is a way of, it's like I was telling somebody about Carolina football. They make you feel like you're a part of something. You get you excited. They get all the money. All you do is get excited.
You get the excitement.
Yeah, and you spend all your money, and Bojangles get a box, get money because you bought chicken. And all you do is go home. That's what party's about. Democratic Party, Republican Party, Green Party to a certain degree is the same way. People got to look out for their interests. If you ain't figuring out how to take care of your family and your community first, you're wasting time.
Family first.
Yeah.
Family first, and all this, again, I think having allies is good, but back when our people were coming out of slavery, our ancestors, there were a few, just a few, white abolitionists. There weren't a whole lot of them, okay? There were just a few. And how many do you think we got together? How many do you think are going to inconvenience their comfort, zone today, so that we can get the right 7